mates, lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm, so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Schrepf's command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through veritable seas to boxes flow. Dar dive. Hoist the sail.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Partnership. This one has been a long time coming. I talked with Fredrik a long time ago about going on to the podcast. I'm glad we finally were able to make it. Fredrik is the former head of partnerships at HR startup Teamtailor, where he was one of the first employees and then scaled that team up to over 12 partnership managers. So I'm incredibly excited to talk about his journey of going from individual contributor to then manager of the partnerships team as well. And then recently, Fredrik actually left Teamtailor and co-founded a partner tech startup called Journey B, which is a two-way PRM. So I'm also really excited to learn about that. Thanks for joining us, Fredrik.
No, excited to be here. It feels like a long time coming.
Yeah. So when we started talking, one of the things which really stood out to me is that our paths and partnerships are actually quite similar. So I wanted to start with your journey into partnerships. How did you get started in partnerships when you joined Teamtailor?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who have similar paths. I think for me, it was a sheer coincidence. I think a lot of people don't dream about going to school and then becoming a partnership manager. And a lot of people don't think the same thing with sales. It's just something
Yet.
That's what. Hopefully that'll change soon, because I think everybody who really comes into it and starts getting somewhere, it starts developing a passion for it, which I think is one of the most intriguing parts about partnerships, because it's such a cool job that your goal is to be able to build relationships with other people. Essentially your job is create friends. If you're taking it from a granular level, but at its core, it was a coincidence at a certain point. I joined as a salesperson at that company about a year in after I've been doing quite well. My CEO our CEO came up to me and was like, "Hey, Fredrik, would you like to do partnerships? I think you would be really suited to do partnerships." And my initial idea was like, "What's partnerships? I have no idea what partnerships is." But I said, sure, that sounds fun. I think that's going to be a better career trajectory than if I just stick with sales. I vividly remember my internal conversation in my head with myself about okay, is it better for me in 10 years from now if I try this, learn this, do this, or that if I just stick around in sales? Which path do I think will develop me the most, regardless of the outcome, if the results, money, whatever? And I chose to do partnerships. So it was a sheer coincidence. We started getting, our CEO heard from somebody else that partnerships is something worth betting on, and he thought that I was the right person to try doing it, and I started delving deep headfirst without knowing anything what I was getting myself into.
Yeah, awesome. It's interesting that your CEO had the foresight to say, "Hey, you should work in partnerships." I feel like a lot of times the story actually goes a little bit different, where some individual in the company just sees there's an opportunity for partners and just goes well, I want to figure out how to work with these people, right? What sparked that request from your CEO to actually start working with partners?
I actually haven't asked him. I probably should in hindsight. What are the core reasons? So we barely had partners. We had a few partners at that point, and I was generally quite involved with those partners. And I probably saw that he probably saw or heard from somebody else but he had never worked within a partnership organization in that kind of philosophy. And even if the idea came from him initially, I still had to fight my way through the trenches to get the partnerships into that kind of point. I had to struggle for a couple of years, didn't get any budgets, didn't get any support, didn't get anything, even if it was anchored and the idea came from partnerships, which I think a lot of people probably can relate to, that their idea has heard that partnerships is a good thing to do, so let's just start doing it. It's probably just because he heard a success story about some other company or saw some other company doing it really, really well and wanted to try to replicate it in some way, shape, or form, but didn't know exactly the path, and just told me to be here's the end goal. That's where we're going to go. How you get there, that's something you figure out on your own.
Yeah, that's so funny. I feel like there definitely is some word of mouth, and some people have real success with partners. The funny thing about partnerships is often, though, that everything is a partnership. It's one of my pet peeves in this industry is what is a partnership? A lot of people don't even know. So what kind of partnerships did you actually look after, or what was the expectation that you would do, and what did the reality actually turn out to be?
Yeah, I think The reality was, I think that's that the pet peeve with partnerships is probably one of my biggest pet peeves as well. The fact that partnerships is such a broad umbrella term that encumbers so many different things. So when you tell people you work in partnerships, their head goes somewhere entirely different based on their own association with partnerships, which could be a million miles away from your association with partnerships. But like the clear goal for us and the clear task that I was given was like, we want you to generate revenue through partners. So as I got this role and I was told to be like, hey, you need to start generating revenue through partnerships, I started doing research, so reading blogs, videos, podcasts, and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of it was very channel oriented about how do you create a reseller program, how do you create distributor programs, how to do this, how do you do that. But it was very clear quite quickly that wasn't the right path for Teamtailor, because we had a pretty large sales team. Our entire sales motion was very sales driven, and sales was the biggest one. And we didn't want to create that internal like channel conflict, internal competition. So we needed to find ways to be like, how do we create referrals from partners? And we tried companies that we can create these kind of referrals from. And it quite quickly leaned into being quite technology intensive. We were in a space that required and wanted quite a lot of integrations and quite a lot of integration partners. So when I first started doing it, I was fully channel. I was looking at professional services, agencies, consultancies. That was the core element because it was the easiest one to get started with. But a year and a half, 2 years in, it was like 95% of my focus was about how do I get these other ISVs to, or technology partners to build an integration for us, and how do we build a go-to-market motion together? How do we make sure that your sales team recommends us, and how do we make sure that we recommend you guys, and how do we do webinars and events and all those kind of stuff to create buzz together, while still just looking at how do we create a better together story with our product and their product that creates ultimate better value for the end customers. So it became a lot more tech oriented and a lot more like back and forth than just, hey, here's a lot of partners who promote us. It was a lot about how do we create value for customers. But of course, this is a topic you can talk about really in depth for a really long time. But just to really narrow it down, it quickly pivoted from like, I'm going to do resellers, I'm going to do channel, and going to have a lot of agencies doing all of that, into it being like tech partners being 95% of the revenue and 95% of the partnership base.
Yeah. Got it. That's fascinating. Like with these tech partners, like there's a different podcast interview which I listened to as in preparation for this episode. And in that, like you mentioned that like and all of the content you found was like channel oriented, and then what you were actually looking for was like tech partnerships or ecosystem related. And so I wanted to ask you, like, how do you differentiate between the two? Like, can tech partners be a channel as well, or why couldn't you just like fit the information that you had about channel onto like these tech partners?
I think the biggest difference for me is the nature of the bilateral angle in an ecosystem. An ecosystem needs to be beneficial in both ways, and it needs to be sort of giving and taking in a different ways. Whilst within channel, in my experiences with working with this, it was much more transactional. Of course, there's still the value add and there's still the core elements within the product, but channel in my end is much more transactional, where there's a other company providing services to sell your product, whilst within the system it's about you selling their software and then selling your software. It has to go both ways, and you need to be able to do much more things and think about the bigger picture about how do we package us, somebody else, and potentially even a third party into a unified solution, and how do we go to market with that, rather than this is an agency that is promoting us because they have a value added proposition that benefits their customers. So in my head, the biggest one was like channel was much more like receiving, and ecosystem was much more receiving and giving, which was probably the biggest one that stood out for me. With a lot of the input was about how do you get a partner to recommend you and sell you and train them, and how do you do that kind of stuff. But it was much more about how do I train my own team to be aware of partnerships? How do I train my own team to do this? How do I train my own team to start doing a lot of these the different things, and be aware of integrations, be aware of how they pitched it, be aware of how it all fits together in the greater scheme of things, rather than just how do I train this partner to, as effectively as possible, promote our services.
Yeah, that's such an interesting way of framing it, because like I guess like in a channel motion, traditionally, if you have a reseller like an agency or something like that, like there's a clearer hierarchy where like you provide the service, you provide the product, and then they resell the product for you. But I guess with two tech companies, as you said, like it's much more bidirectional. Like you both have products, you both try to like generate new leads for each other. So how do you like handle those exchanges becomes really important. we kind of get to the core of this episode, which is why your sales team doesn't want to work with partners.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's the biggest challenge here, right? Because like if you have a one-directional relationship, like a transactional one, it's much more sales, like it's much more the language of a salesperson, I guess, where it's like, okay, like you send me a lead and I close it and then we're done, rather than I have to send you leads as well. What other reasons did you find on like what was the initial reaction from the Teamtailor team when you presented them these partners and we're like, okay, we're going to work with partners now, and it's not going to be just transactional. Like you're not just going to get leads, but you actually have to send them leads as well.
I think it was not received as well as I would have thought. For me, it was crystal clear why you need to do it, but I realized that I needed to educate them a lot more, and I probably didn't do that to the same extent. And I think like it comes down to this, like you said, the hierarchy structure about now we're both being equal. We need to give them, otherwise we won't get anything in return. And they, as a salesperson, generally like wants to get a lot, and they might not want to do give as much back. And I think the biggest pivot is that it forces you to do things differently. It forces you to have a new perspective in how you approach sales and how you approach customers. Whenever you're speaking to a customer, it's not just you and the customer. It's about thinking, is there a place for us to create value through bringing in a partner in this scenario? Is there a place for me to, like, you add sort of a third party into the equation, which is quite unnatural in a sales motion when you're just used to being me. I'm a salesperson. I'm speaking to the customer about solving the problem. Then you have to start adding, partner and the external party that you don't know too much about, you can't control too much about them, and how you get that involved. Like they were super excited about getting referrals from these partners, like super excited. But we still have where they pretty much started getting conflicts with these partners. So they got a referral from a partner, and then the salesperson badmouthed the partner, while the customer asked them about it, because they were still used about being like, this is our company, I need to pitch my product, I need to pitch this, and to pitch this. It's less about like being solution oriented and seeing like, how do I figure out the best solution for this customer, whether that's just us or if there's a partner that generally tends to be involved. And I think for us, it was also pretty clear that it works much more effectively within larger customers, because you tend to be much more solution oriented when you're selling. If you're selling larger customers and enterprise segments, they generally tend to have an existing tech stack. They generally tend to be more aware of, like, the customer, and the buyer tends to be much more aware of and tends to be much more vocal about these kind of things as well, which forces the customer to more reflective on how do they actually sell this as a solution within the greater ecosystem, rather than if you're just selling a solution that is a standalone product that they can use without having anything else. The partnership doesn't come in as much into it as well. So there's also clear separation of what kind of product you're selling and how much that is associated to existing ecosystem versus the sales cycle and the deal values and that kind of stuff. That's also something you need to take into account, and which is why it's sort of complicated. Like if you are selling a e-signature platform, for example, you're generally quite on being a part of the CRM ecosystem. So quite cautious from the get-go. You need to be aware of HubSpot or Salesforce or Pipedrive or whatever CRM is your core partner within the space that fits your ICP. We didn't have any larger player that they were already associated with in the ecosystem. It was just us. And then eventually they started adding other segments, which is why it became more tricky. But as we started going up in customer segments and starting selling more towards enterprise and upper mid-market, they started having existing tech stacks, which was more like, how do we fit into this existing ecosystem that the customers are already using?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned it, because it's something which we observed as well, that like referrals work the best if the deal size is large enough that sales reps can actually sit down and strategize and like meet with each other and discuss and so forth, right? Like I feel like if the deal size is too small, like partner referrals need to be more automated, which again makes them more transactional as well, which means it might not be as good of a fit to a partner motion. How do you think about that? Like, do you think it like there is a opportunity for a partner play with like smaller companies or smaller deal sizes as well? Or do you think this is like, especially in the beginning, partner managers should focus specifically on like these larger customers, because that's where they can spend the most time?
I think referrals fits regardless of the cycle. Co-selling is much more suitable for higher end if you want to create distinguishments where you actually get two salespeople to come in together and try to strategize how do we win this customer together. But a partner just giving a handoff saying, hey, this customer is looking for a solution like yours, just works regardless of the customer segment, because it just works on the trusted referrals. And I think it works quite well regardless of customer segments in this day and era, because people rely on trusted recommendations, regardless if it's from a partner, if it's from an investor, if it's from an ex-employee or an ex-boss or whatever it is. Like, when you're looking to purchase something and somebody tells you, hey, you should look at this, you will be much more keen to listen to what that person is saying. So the referrals always works, but like referrals is much more like, hey, I give you this lead and then I hand it off and then I just take a step back. Within cold selling, it's much more like strategic oriented, where you're trying to get two salespeople to orchestrate how do we work to close this together, and here's all the intel you need to know, and here's all the intel you need to know, and how do we strategize. That I think is much more suitable for larger segments and bigger customers, like ACVs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's very much aligned. Like one of the things which I observed as well, just in channel, is like that there's like kind of like a cap at some point where, like, you know, initially, like, it's probably not worth spending too much time on a customer because the deal value is too small. So like it's probably not suited for co-selling. Then there's a point where it's really suited to co-selling because you like have like around a 1 year sales cycle or so where you have a lot of time to spend with a customer. And then after that, at some point you reach a stage again where it's actually not like the best fit anymore because the deal value becomes so large that like you might just want to own like the entire, you know, solution for the customer rather than like, you know, working together with partners to like integrate different solutions into the tool stack as well.
Yeah.
But one of the challenges you mentioned with bad mouthing partners, like it reminded me a lot of like the early days of Hopin, because when I introduced like co-selling motions with tech partners as well, one of our sales leaders just came straight up to me and said, like, I want people to sell our solution. I don't want people to sell partner solutions. I don't want them to refer to partners because that's not what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to just sell our tool, right? What tips do you have for like partner leaders who are starting out and like starting to develop this co-selling motion with partners to like get their sales team involved and like help them understand this approach?
You know, I think we had the same experience where like we don't want our sales team to focus on selling somebody else. They should be fully focused on selling our own product. And I think it comes down to like this being solution oriented. If it's just about transactional, here's close one, go forward, close one, go forward. I think it makes sense to some extent that like, yeah, you need to just be laser focus on that one thing. But it all comes down to like, how do you create the best solution? How do you create the best opportunity to win customers? And like which customers you actually want to win. I think if you have a really sweet ICP that these are the customers we want to target, these are the ones we want to do, then it makes sense to do it. If you want to try to engage your sales team, it needs to be start small. It needs to be start with pilots and start to be testing things. What we saw work best was finding the people, like the internal champions who already started understanding the benefit of doing it. There was generally a few people, or one at least, who started understanding, oh, wow, this could be a really nice thing to do. If I just spend some hours here a week, it increases my sales. It always needs to be tied into what's in it for them. And the same thing with partnerships. Like for a partnership to be successful, it needs to be clearly defined what's in it for you and what's in it for the partner. And the same thing applies with sales. It needs to be a clear value prop. What's in it for the salesperson? Why should they care about working with partnerships? Will that help you close more deals? Will that help you do this? Will that help you do that? You need to be able to make sure you can clarify and do those things. And generally the way you get there is by testing small and like starting small and getting proof of concept and proving results. Salespeople care about the result metrics. They care about this person closed this much because of this, and they care about hearing it from their peers. Like we saw that, like, and there's a general trope of like, you can never motivate somebody, but you can inspire somebody. So the motivation to do it has to come from within. This person needs to want to do it themselves. And if they see that their peers is doing really, really well because they are working with partnerships, that's going to inspire them to want to work with partnerships as well. So if you find these key people who are quite keen to try it out, try to explore it, and are keen on doing it, build success stories with them, you essentially start layering, where you have a few, and then you get a few more, and then you have a few more, and then you have a few more, a few more, and a few more. And that also applies with the number of partners you run this with. If you just say, here are all of our partners, do this with all of them, it's going to be too overwhelming for them. But if you say, here's this partner that I want you to work and think about these keywords and these phrases and this use cases, if your customer says X, Y, and Z, that's when you would be appropriate for you to potentially loop this partner in. or potentially if you get a referral from this partner, these are the contextual cues that would be beneficial for you to know just from the core overarching strategies of this partnership. And then you can start adding more partners and more partners and more partners and more partners. Like I definitely did that the wrong way. I told them, hey, here's all of our partners, all the information you need to have about them. And if I did it again, it would be much more about focusing on a few people and a few partners, and then add more people and more partners, more people, more partners, more people, more partners. And eventually it's going to become second nature to them to think about it.
Yeah.
And you can never have 100 strategic partners that you'll be sending all of the leads to. There's generally going to be a few that become the favorites, and that comes down to relationships and culture. Like if you like working with this person, you have a solid relationship working with this person, you're going to go out on a limb to do a lot of that kind of stuff. And this is a topic I can speak about for a long time, but for me, it really became clear once I became a leader myself. When it came to the understanding, like, how do I motivate somebody else, and how do I get this person to change their behavior in a certain way? When I myself became a leader and became intrigued in one of my own leadership skills, it became much more effective for me to actually lead salespeople, because that's one of the tropes within partnerships, that you are always going to be a leader, but you're generally not the leader of the people that you need to do something. They're going to have a separate, and they're going to do something else. So you need to be able to find other cues and other things to be able to, how do I get this person to change their behavior? And there's so much you can learn there from leadership, like methodologies and psychology, about how do you actually get somebody involved. Like clearly defining the purpose, so everybody actually knows what is the reason we're doing this. Why should I care about this? If they don't know and you just tell them we need to do this, they're not going to do it. You need to clearly define them. If you can bring them on board, tell them like, this is why we're doing it, how should we do that, they can be a part of the journey, so they can feel involvement within the process, even better. There are some general psychology and leadership cues that I think every single partnership manager benefits so much, especially if they're working with this kind of partnerships, from like proper leadership training and being a really effective leader. Even if you don't have people reporting to you, being a leader in partnerships, in a partnership role, is crucial, because you need to be able to influence your partners and your internal stakeholders. So I think that's going to be super key. And like, you can set goals and make it clear. So like, do you want to do like these? This is a SMART goal. This is what I want you to do. This is the time frame. This is what like we want to measure. How many referrals you get? What's the result? Then we test and we iterate. It's always beneficial to give them some alternatives. Like you can either choose to do this or do this. It's like, instead of just telling them, please send referrals to our partners, you can just be like, either you send referrals to your partners, or you can be like, give them information. Like give them two options, so both of them are positives for the way you want to do it, but make it simple, make it small, make it something they can easily do without needing to change everything that they're doing, and you can always gradually add on top of it. It comes down to this kind of behavior of getting salespeople on board. It's not a one act that you need to do. It needs to become a habit that you need to regularly teaching them and reminding them and talking about them and spending a lot of time with them on a lot of these things. Like, that's how you build these relationships. So spend a lot of time on that. There's a lot of things you can do from a psychology and a leadership standpoint to get these salespeople on board. But it comes down to, you need to understand what's in it for them, and you need to get them on board with to understand the purpose and how and the why.
Yeah, I really like that. I think it's interesting because it reminds me a lot of product managers as well, because they technically like don't have any direct reports within the engineering team. Their whole job is just to influence, right? And so that's actually a great school to become like a good leader, because you don't have like direct authority. You're not the one who's like pointing to the sales team and go like, you have to work with this partner. You have to much more like go into their motivation and understand like why they're doing the things they do and how this will help them, and then like do that for every single stakeholder, which is why partnerships people tend to be like quite good communicators, because they're really like good at empathizing with the other teams, or they're not good partnership leaders, which means they won't stay in their roles for too long.
Yeah, but I think that like to really make it even more specific, like number one, if you want your sales people, the AEs, to be working with this, you need the sales manager's involvement. The sales manager needs to be saying the same thing. If you're telling the sales person, this is what I want you to do, and then they go to their boss saying, should I do this? And the boss says no, they're not going to do it. So you need both you and the boss to be aligned that this is something we need to do. that's the number one core of like, you need to do these kind of things. And there are like, you can always add more things like feedback loops, so always give them positive reinforcement whenever they're doing something right, to be able to encourage the right behavior. And then they're going to be more likely to listen when they're not doing something right, and you give them constructive feedback. Core leadership tropes like feedback, how to build like accountability, and that kind of stuff are really core elements to be able to engage a sales team at a high level as well. But it comes down to like, you are not their direct manager, so you need to have involvement from their direct manager, and their direct manager needs to be telling you the same story, telling them the same story as you're telling them. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how much you do the one thing, because their sales manager will have like overall influence. So you always need to start with their managers and the people who they will be looking at, because otherwise it's not going to work.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things which you just mentioned is, you have to prepare yourself to be a leader. You have to prepare yourself to like be empathetic with, what sales teams want. I'm curious how that plays out once you grow your team. As I mentioned in the intro, like you grew the team to like almost 12 people or over 12 people. On the partnership side, what were these interactions with these partnership managers and the sales team? Like, what was the role of the partnership manager? And then how did you train these partner managers to work with the sales team? Like, how did you just package all that you just explained in a way that like a partner manager who you just hired can understand it, and then actually go out and like work effectively with your sales team?
I think for us, it was quite natural that they had quite a lot of involvement. We had geographical focus with our partnership managers. So somebody was in charge of the US, somebody was in charge of Latin America, somebody for Oceania, somebody for France, somebody for Germany, and they had dedicated sales teams. And so they were already working quite closely with these people. So I already worked and once I hired somebody who was in charge of that region, I didn't have a lot of contact with individual salespeople. So I had to teach my team how to be leaders, how to influence these salespeople, how to work with their direct sales managers for that region, how to do these leadership tropes. So my role as a leader was to teach them how to become leaders, to actually start getting the same kind of influence. That was one of the things that really saw resonating, because they needed to do the same kind of influencing and teaching them. So I need to give them the tools of how do you give feedback, how do you create accountability, how do you create these kind of engagements, how do you work with these kind of people, how listen to what the tropes are, what's in it for them, what can you offer them. Like, I needed to teach them to become proper partnership leaders, not just partnership or managers in that sense, to actually be able to create that kind of influence. That was like one of the core tropes that I spent a lot of time on one-on-ones and weekly meetings and that kind of stuff around, because it's going to be tough otherwise.
Yeah. Do you have an example of what that looked like in action?
I think one of the core things was just like, I think it comes down to, I think there's different things to do, but the one thing that stood out, my first thought when you said it, was regarding feedback, and how feedback is generally something that people don't like too much about, and they don't want to do it. But feedback is such a powerful tool to change the behavior. If I always tell you how you're doing the right things, and you're always trying to do these kind of things, and like if you're on a behavioral change path, and I give you positive cues that this behavior is the right thing, this behavior is the right thing, and I raise you and I praise you and I give you credit and I salute you to all the other peers, you're going to look good in doing that kind of stuff. So I needed to teach my team and have that as a regular occurrence to some extent about when do I do this, how do I do this, how should you give feedback, and have that as a story bullet point that was like available in Notion. This is the template that we use to give feedback. This is what you should think about. This needs to be specific. It needs to be timely. It needs to be this, needs to be that. So there were some of those things that like we always had as recurring trends and recurring topics. And we probably did a lot of things, but just that was the first thing that stood out. But like, how do you actually reinforce the kind of behavior? And one of the things that I think is worth taking into account, if you have somebody who's giving positive feedback, and then the salesperson asks for feedback, am I doing the right thing? Is this the right thing? Always say yes. Always be positive. Yes, they're doing the right thing. Because if they ask that am I doing the right thing, that means they're trying to change. They're trying to do the right positive change, and they're trying to get the positive behavior in place, and you're just enforcing that to the right thing. And then you can be specific about like, you did, yes, that's awesome, but you could do this specific thing slightly better, but this thing you did really, really well. Those are the things about how do you create influence, and how do you create the behavioral change, and how do you influence others. I think that's a lot of what I spent my time on. It's like enabling my team to become effective leaders, so they could do the same thing for their teams.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I know we're hitting up on time, but I wanted to get in one question, which comes up a lot when working with sales teams. And that's just how do you even measure the impact of all of this? Like, yes, you have partner managers and they map against your sales teams, but what is the goal that you're driving for the sales team? And what is the goal you measure the impact of your partner managers on? Is it referrals? Is it influence, which I know is like very contentious right now? Is it, like a different metric that you found that works really well for measuring the impact?
I think it needs to be measured around the same kind of impact that salespeople are looking at. So, like looking at revenue and looking at the kind of stuff like this much of the pipeline, this much of the revenue, this much of this person's individual revenue pipeline was impacted, influenced, or involved by partnerships. And like
Mhm.
the influence versus referral question, that's a topic we could talk about for another half hour. But like,
Yeah.
that was like, okay, if a partner's involved to be necessary to be able to close this deal, it would be influenced if they're giving us intel and that kind of stuff as well. We even had a further extent was like enabled by partner, and that was like just for integrations, like because this integration exists, can we close this opportunity? If we didn't have this, we couldn't get this customer. And like, so we looked at those kind of metrics, like how much of the pipeline, how much of the revenue, and try to get those back into numbers so that the salespeople actually look at that. And then we could see it from the holistic standpoint, like this is how much the partnership leader and manager is doing. And that's something you need your RevOps team and you need to work closely with sales managers with. And also part of the reasons why I eventually left to do JourneyBee, because I got frustrated that you couldn't do it and you had to be reliant on a lot of that kind of stuff. But that's also a separate topic that we can talk about for another half hour. But I think it needs to be anchored around the success metrics of salespeople. If you want to track and measure these things, you need to look at the things that they're looking at and how you influence their metrics, because they don't care about arbitrary numbers that aren't relevant to them. They care about how many meetings am I getting because of this, how much of my revenue am I getting because of this. And if you can track those specific things, that's going to continue the flywheel effect of creating an enablement and influence.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of the biggest issues I have with partnerships teams is that they often go out and like create their own metrics of like these are the things that we do for the company, and it's like it's not related to like the sales team. And so then the sales team is like, yeah, you're kind of like in your own world. You're kind of like separate from what we do, which is never a good spot to be in. But you want to like have the exact shared goals with the sales team and figure out how can we drive like the metrics that matter to them. But before we head out, like I do want to hear a little bit about JourneyBee. Like, can you tell how this all loops back to JourneyBee? And where can people find out more?
Yeah, they can. The long story is that during all these years, we went through several PRMs and we went through several CRMs and we went through all of these different things. And I always felt that it was really, really difficult to get my salespeople to send a referral to a partner and for that to be measurable and easy for them to have all the context and all the information. It was difficult for them once they got a referral to have all that context and all that information. They need to log into a portal. They need to submit a form. So like the core of what we're trying to do with JourneyBee is to create a like sort of an end-to-end platform that allows you to send a lead to your partner directly from your CRM, and that goes directly into your partner CRM, and you have full visibility of everything that's going on. And for the partnership managers to have one dedicated place where they're managing all the operational stuff for metrics and day-to-day operations, like meeting with partner managers and tasks, internal projects, and co-marketing, all the things you're doing from a day-to-day perspective. And it just came about because I was so frustrated that we were doing this and we weren't getting the support. We were trying to build workarounds on existing solutions that we sort of inherited from marketing and sales. And the straw that broke the camel's back was when we switched from HubSpot to Salesforce. And for 6 months, everything I had built up in HubSpot disappeared, and I couldn't measure, I couldn't track, I couldn't do anything until the RevOps team had enough time for us to do these things again. And like, it just felt so frustrating that you had to rely on these things. We couldn't do our job effectively for pretty much 6 months because the organization switched to something, and we were far down on the list. And I saw the great tools that were out there for sales and for marketing that helped them do their jobs much more effectively. And just like, well, that should exist for partnership as well. And what are the core things that most people in partnerships struggle with? It's like, how do you get leads? How do you track the leads? How do you make sure that you save yourself time so you can spend more time building relationships with your stakeholders or your partners?
Yeah. Tying partnerships back to revenue.
Yeah.
That's such a good story. Yeah. Where can people find out more? Like where can they learn more about you, and where can they learn more about JourneyBee?
Connect to me on LinkedIn. Go to our website, journey.io. Go to our LinkedIn page. I think that's probably the easiest one, depending on how much kind of information you want. You can try out the product for free. If you're just starting out, need a PRM or the equivalents of that, you can use that for free instead of doing that with spreadsheets, and you can click around and get a feel for the product yourself. Just depending on your preferred route, you can reach out to me directly. You can go to our website, go to LinkedIn, or you can just explore the product on your own.
Yeah, that's awesome. Always love a free trial as well.
Free trial. It's a free full product that allows you to do all the core things you need from a PRM for free forever.
Yeah, even better. But thanks so much for coming on to the show, Fredrik. This was like a really eye-opening session. Definitely gave me a lot of thoughts about how I want to work with sales teams in the future. And yeah, if people want to check out JourneyBee, make sure to check it out on Fredrik's profile, on LinkedIn, and also on the website, journeybee.io. Thanks a lot, Fredrik.
Good to be here. Thanks for that.
Hark now, mates, lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm, so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Schrepf's command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through veritable seas to boxes flow. Dar-o-die. Hoist the sail.